Hey, good morning. I'm Nicola Chin with Up With Community, and I'm here today with Jerome Bennett, social entrepreneur and health equity advocate. We're excited to talk with you today about shit talking, how it hurts our movements, and what we're going to do about it. But first, I want to hear a little bit about you, Jerome, and what you're doing in the world. What are you up to?
Yeah, so this fall I'll be launching a health equity initiative. And the purpose of the health equity initiative is to really bring people together around group fitness and well-being. It's all about health, happiness, and opportunities. And so with that being said, I'm also going to create the space to use like strategic storytelling strategies to have conversations grounded in people's experience so that we can capture that content in a publication, also as a docu-series, and use those tools as tools for change on the policy level and to raise awareness in our communities.
That's awesome, Jerome.
Yes.
Well, you've been doing this work in Maine communities for many, many years, and in some of Maine's most vulnerable communities. And that's really why I wanted to come talk to you about shit talking.
Yes.
So let's start with, what is shit talking? How do you define shit talking?
You know, I define shit talking as talking shit. and really, you know, shit talking is kind of more devastating than people think about, you know, at first glance. And, you know, it's shit talking happens. There's a power dynamic at play when you're talking about shit talking.
Yeah, what's the power
dynamic?
dynamic?
So that, you know, people talk shit to really hold power and to, you know, deflect any attempts at getting at shared power.
That's true. That's true. Right, and I try to be really clear about differentiating shit talking from other types of working through beef, right? So like, I may come to you to problem solve and say, hey, I'm having this problem with so-and-so, can you help me? And in that exchange, we're bringing care to the situation, we're being confidential, it's not about you going around and talking about business, you know, with other people. And I'm owning some of my own stuff in it, right? Same thing if I come to you to vent, right? This person's driving me crazy. But, you know, what I'm trying to do is really process my own emotions, and I'm naming that and owning that those are my emotions. What I think about when I see shit talking, it often follows the phrase, I love Nicola, but, right? And it's kind of this like, I'm going to make a judgment or a label about someone that is putting them down, that is undermining their power, and not own anything about my stuff that's a part of that judgment. And I'm not doing it in a confidential space, and I'm kind of expecting you to take what I'm saying and spread it around, right? And it often comes from our allies and our closest friends, right?
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I like speak to and have done a lot of research on is like implicit bias. And what you were getting at, you know, is you know, we have these negative attitudes that we inflict on people by you know, placing our labels and placing our judgments onto them. And if you're not kind of like neutral, or you don't own that, and if you don't have an awareness of that, it's very easy to, you know, perpetuate the problem.
I think that's right. What I've often seen happen to people of color is, you know, they will come out being themselves, being their most beautiful, talented selves, and folks who feel threatened by that, who don't understand it, who feel confused, have these like emotions and reactions, and then they blame the person instead of looking at what is their internalized racism, what is their internalized implicit bias, how are they a part of a racist system that then sees them as, well, that person is the problem, so I'm going to shit talk about this person, right? I love them, but I wouldn't work with them, or I wouldn't hire them, you know, and that's how we get divided. That is the wedge that racism is in a lot of our movements, right? So, you know, how have you experienced the negative impacts of shit talking, or how have people you know experience negative impacts?
Yeah, you know, and so it depends on, I guess, what angle you're looking at it from. For instance, like, in my work, I've done like trainings for like, prosecutors from across the state around like implicit bias. And, you look at the evaluations and, it's positive feedback, you're getting high scores, it's insightful. And then there's people that are in control and people that hold the power that through shit talking creates this whole narrative that's contrary to the actual experience that took place. And those narratives live longer than the evaluations that are in my folder on my desk, and so that's really impactful, and it's divisive, and it's used to marginalize and alienate.
That is a huge insight, Jerome. Because what we often know shit talking is happening when people avoid the direct, open, constructive ways to share feedback and engage in making, like if you were trying to make something better, you share it in the evaluation. If you're trying to make something better, you share it directly with you or me, right? Yeah. And so when we circumnavigate like the more direct ways of giving feedback and evaluation, ding, 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 we might be shit talking, right? I really love
when
that.
When that happens, you might be shit talking.
You might be shit talking. Yeah, I want like a little button that I can be like, oh, shit talking. Well, and so I've had to really go through a process over the last few years of understanding better when I'm shit talking, right? And the ways in which I am perpetuating that, right? So, several years ago when I was just coming up in this work and I was feeling really insecure about where I was, when I felt threatened or when I felt like maybe I'm not as good as somebody else, I would see myself shit talking, right? And that other person's beauty and glory triggered my low self-confidence. And so then I had to find a way to knock them down a notch so that I could feel better, And I think the flip side of being aware of my implicit bias has also been choosing to love myself more. Because I think when I love myself more, I don't need to shit talk. I don't need it. Right? I can problem solve. I can vent. I can work out my grievances, but I don't need to shit talk. What else do you think we can do about shit talking in our movements and our communities?
I'm inclined to say, like, let people talk shit, right? Freedom of speech. Like, I don't care what people think about me. So
you come from a different perspective. Tell me.
I could care less if you talk shit. However, in the context of, in the example that I told you earlier, like in the context of like power, like shit talking can be devastating. Especially, and you mentioned trigger, and we can get into this a little bit later on. Shit talking has adverse health effects because they do create triggers. And so when we look at that in like the educational setting, or when we're trying to measure outcomes in like the juvenile justice system, like now if shit talking is a part of the culture and that's creating a trigger, then people aren't really given a fair and equitable opportunity to succeed. And so when you look at shit talking from that aspect, it becomes deadly.
Yeah. So talk more about that power. Yeah. How do you see it working on power?
So in terms of like the shit talking individuals, I could care less.
But the system.
It's important that in order that we implement something to mitigate shit talking, and that looks like shared power, that look like shared decision making. And I come from a school of thought where, regardless of where your stance is in society, those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And so naturally, you have to, and this is what I do as a professional, like I connect people, I find out what are the issues, I find out who's directly affected, and we have conversations and form groups, and with that comes empowerment, with that comes like, resilience, and then we can form these partnerships with decision makers and with these committees that are have a top-down approach to better our outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So what I hear you saying is, Nicola, don't sweat individuals. Don't sweat the one-on-ones. But what we see is when individuals who have systemic institutional power use shit-talking as a part of their systemic institutional power, they can really create inequitable outcomes for folks and really block the leadership of directly impacted people. And it sounds like what I hear you saying is some of the pathways to shared power are like, how do we have more transparent institutions with transparent decision making and transparent accountable evaluation processes?
Absolutely.
So that individuals can't use backdoor or kind of like behind the scenes stuff to take people down. Does that sound right?
Absolutely.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
So
Transparency is our friend.
So important. Right?
Well, talk to me more about the health impacts of shit talking.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, think about a hard experience that you've been through, and think about the ways that that past might manifest itself in the present moment. You know, there's things in our environments that serve as triggers, and that kind of takes you out of the moment because you're now regulating your emotions, you're regulating your feelings, you're trying to figure out what's going on in here and what's going on in your head. And so, for instance, if I have like teachers that are using, you know, discriminatory language, if I have, you know, a culture of youth that are like, you know, slut shaming and using, you know, derogatory remarks, like all of these like words are having like devastating and adverse consequences because they're serving as triggers, because these words are shit talking that by definition is alienating and marginalizing and pushing to the outskirts. And we know that when individuals are isolated, that risk factors tend to go up and protective factors go down. And that's the importance of like groups. You know, we need to bring people in because we're social beings, and it takes a community to make moves and fix the issues that we've inherited today.
I love that. Yeah. How do we, and you know, what that made me think is, you know, when I am shit talking someone else, when I'm trying to knock them down a peg, when I'm just kind of, what I'm really doing is trying to pull more people into my negative feelings, to feel those negative feelings with me.
And validation is a form of like self-care, you know? So those are our, shit talking is our unintended consequence of trying to, like, Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Okay. But I'm just like, yes, and like I'm kind of mind melding with you right now, right? It's like I was seeking comfort in the wrong way. I was seeking comfort through that validation in the wrong way and doing harm to others in that process.
And hate kills, you know. So and you know, forgiveness is so important, especially when we talk about mental well-being and clarity. And so, like, literally, even the shit talkers that I absolutely like demise, and I can give you like just a long list of them. I don't, even though they're blame worthy, I don't attribute blame to it, because the way that our system and society is designed, it's a flawed system. And so because the system is flawed, one of the way that those flaws look like to me is strained relationships, shit talking, failed partnerships, you know, hate, you know. So that's what it looks like for us, you know. And it's like distinguishing that, understanding where that comes from, and that grounds your understanding and allows you and brings you to this level of acceptance, so that we can navigate these realities in a way that allows us to achieve self-preservation, which is hard when you think about the fact that, when you look at our history and when you know, when there's a dominant culture and there's just like clear instances of oppression and various levels of inequalities like everywhere for non-dominant groups.
This is good stuff, Jerome. I really appreciate you calling us to think about systems and institutions and connect our head and our heart to our mouth.
Right? Holistic. You got to be holistic.
See in the whole. Well, thank you again. And check out Jerome Bennett's work. And I'm looking forward to seeing your fitness and your community health work blossom and grow over the summer. So thanks, Jerome.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, great.